Welcome back. We've already made some neat progress, having learned how to create Unity projects, save and load scenes, navigate the interface, make objects and manipulate those. Now it's time for us to take a closer look at components. So all objects in Unity are made up of components. Components are what give the objects their various behaviors and an identity inside of your game. There's a component that will make your object be affected by gravity, for example, others that will enable the object to detect collisions, make it glow, animate, and so much more. For example, let's select the main camera by left-clicking on it and take a look at the inspector, which is where all the components related to the main camera are stored. So all objects have a transform component. It indicates, as we saw in the previous video, where the object is located in the scene, what's its rotation, scale, and so on. On top of the transform components, the main camera has the camera component. This is what enables us to see stuff in the actual game view. You'll see that if I uncheck this little box, the game view suddenly goes black because there's no longer any valid camera. So yeah, to enable and disable components on an object, just toggle on and off this little box. You can also remove a component completely and stop it from cluttering the inspector by clicking on this cog and choosing remove component. Note that you can also collapse a component by clicking on its name. Again, to clear some space and make the inspector look a bit less confusing. And you can also left click on the component's name and drag to move it around the inspector, in front or behind other components. And this is of course purely for you to stay organized and clean. Moving components won't affect the game objects. So there's of course plenty interesting settings on each component. In the last video we saw what the transform component was made up of. Now let's take a look at the camera component. A lot of these settings can be ignored for now, but some are very useful, such as the projection type. You can either set your camera to be orthographic or perspective. Perspective will make it so that objects that are further away from your camera appear smaller than objects which are nearer. So in a 3D top-down game, for example, here's how the scene looks with a camera set to perspective, and here's with orthographic. But this isn't very important in 2D games, since all objects should have 0 on the z-axis. So I usually leave this at orthographic. And now there's the size setting. A higher number will zoom out your camera, whereas a lower number will zoom it in. You can tweak this value by holding down the left mouse button on the actual settings and dragging, which is easier and faster than just typing stuff in. And you can also change the camera's background color. Now, there are so many components. You have a complete list of them if you click on this Add Components button, and they're sorted into various categories. Those related to 2D physics, for example, can be found inside this 2D physics category, and then just left click on whichever one you want to add it to your object. For example, I'll click on this 2D box collider one, and now you'll see that my camera has a 2D box collider component attached to it. Now obviously don't worry about learning all these off by heart. You'll discover the most important ones bit by bit throughout this course, and while making games yourself. The best way to learn what each component does is just tweak some of its settings, observe and test. Note that you can also click on this little booklet icon at the top of each component to learn lots more about it via Unity's handy documentation. With that said, let's now select our 2D game object made in the previous video, and you'll see that it also has two components, a transform one like always, and this sprite renderer one. This is what enables the object to actually render this image inside of the scene and game view. If I disable this component, you'll notice that my sun image disappears, and like with the camera, there are various useful settings on this component. So clicking on this small circle, for example, will let you change the image the sprite renderer displays. You can also change its color, flip the object along the X and Y axis, and very importantly, set an order in layer. So for example, say we have two images, a sun and moon. Let's also say I wanted the sun to be in front of the moon. To do so, I just need to make sure that the sun has a higher order in layer value than the moon. So I'll give the sun an order in layer of 1 and leave the order in layer of the moon at 0. If both sprites both have the same order in layer, then you might get some odd looking behaviors at times, where one moment the sun is in front of the moon, and then the next the moon is in front of the sun. Okay, just before wrapping up the video, note that you can reset a component back to its default settings by clicking on the cog icon and choosing reset components. So for example, if you mess around with your camera component and really want a quick and easy way to go back to default, just click that reset component button. It's as easy as that. You can also copy and paste component values. So say you wanted the sun to have the same transform component values as the moon. Well, you can simply select the moon, click on the cog and choose copy component values, and then select the sun and choose paste component values. Of course, you can only copy and paste the values of similar components, so you wouldn't be able to paste the value of a transform component into a camera component, for example. So hopefully you understand a bit better what components are and how we can use them. Of course, we'll be using loads throughout this course, and I and my brother will be explaining to you what they do bit by bit. But also make sure to experiment by yourself and read the documentation if in doubt about anything, or if just ask for help or some extra explanations via the course's Discord server. Okay, I'll see you in the next video where we'll create our very first script. Cheers!